This is Learn from Others, where we interview a cross-section of successful individuals so you can learn from their experiences, achievements, and even their mistakes. We ask 4 questions that will educate and inspire. Greg Stanley will be your guide as we join our guest on a journey from adolescent daydreaming to success in today's world. Join us on this adventure as we learn from others together.
Welcome to Learn from Others, where we help others succeed by sharing success. I'm very excited about our special guest today, Caitlyn Sweetapple. Caitlyn, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Well, before you take us on your career journey, if you would, could you tell me, what did you want to be when you grew up?
When I was younger, I knew from a very young age that I wanted to be a teacher. And specifically when I was younger, I wanted to be a physical education teacher.
Okay. Now, why did you want to do that at such a young age?
I always really liked school. I liked going to school and learning new things. And I had some pretty great teachers growing up, so that was kind of my drive from a pretty young age about why I wanted to continue staying in classrooms as I got older.
Wow, well, that's pretty cool. So, like, what age are we talking about? 8 years old, 5 years old, 13 years old, that you felt like you wanted to be a teacher?
Around 12, 13 is when I started really kind of honing in on what I wanted to be, which is a very young age.
Yeah, so actually speak to one or two of those teachers that really had a positive influence on you. What type of teacher was it? Was it, your third grade teacher, or can you give an example of how they impacted your life at such a young age?
It's kind of global, not necessarily a specific teacher, but really the teachers that took the extra time to really invest in some of my interests and some of the things that helped me learn was really it made me really want to be a teacher that sort of honed in on students' individual characteristics from a pretty young age.
Oh, that's cool. So it wasn't necessarily an activity or something. It was the level of interest they showed in you specifically. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
Oh, well, that's really cool. So what do you do today? Are you involved in teaching in some form?
Yes, so I am currently the Director of Education at Shrub Oak International School, which is a private school for students on the autism spectrum.
Okay, now where's this school located and what grades do they cater to?
So we work with students from 8 years old to 30 years old, and we are located in northern Westchester, New York. So I started off I knew, like I said, I wanted to be a physical education teacher. So I actually went into adapted physical education when I graduated from college and did that for a bunch of years working with different age groups. And then I really actually started as a teaching assistant and sort of worked my way up to be a teacher. And obviously now I'm directing an education program. So I have worked in a bunch of different roles in an education world. And now obviously I'm directing the education program at Shrub Oak.
Like, what was the entry level point for your educational career?
I started as a teaching assistant, so I worked one-on-one with students in special education settings, and also kind of filled in as a substitute where needed. And I did that for about a year before I got my first full-time teaching position.
So walk us through kind of how your role is different from a teacher's perspective to the director of education. Like, if you could explain to our students kind of the different aspects of those two roles in scope. Obviously, as a teacher, you're dealing directly with the students, and I would assume as a director, you're dealing more with the teachers and still the students. Is that right?
Absolutely. So obviously as a teacher in the classroom, I'm working directly with the students. Now my role is sort of overseeing the education department. So not only do I work with the students, I also mentor and work with the other teachers within our education department. So really working, spending a lot of time in classrooms, observing teachers, observing lessons, giving input about how we can make it better or different, and spending a lot of time with teachers working together to figure out how we can make lessons most meaningful for the students that we work with.
So take us through your typical work week. Like, what does that entail? How many different types of folks and teachers and students are you interacting with? Is there some other aspects of the educational system that you're dealing with on a weekly basis? Is it, what percent's in the classroom versus what's in the office, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so as the director of education, it's a mixture between administrative work and then obviously spending time with teachers and students. So I spend a lot of time having conversations with parents about, things that they're happy with, things that they could see changing for the future, things that they think are important for their child. So I spend a good portion of my time talking to parents and talking to other senior management in the school to try to figure out how we can make the best program really for our students. And then the other half of the time is really spent in classrooms with students. A lot of times I'll set up what I like to call meetings, which are one-on-one meetings with students, which are just kind of check-ins with them to see how they're doing, what we can change, things that they're really happy with in the program. So it's really 50-50 as far as administrative work, and then also spending a lot of time mentoring and being with students and teachers.
Wow. Okay. Now, can you talk a little bit? I don't know if there's been a change or not, but has there been a change as far as the educational system as it relates specifically to special needs students?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely, unfortunately, there hasn't been that much change. I think that there could be a lot more change definitely needed. There has been a recent shift in kind of looking from this medical model to more of a student-centered model. So not necessarily looking to shape behavior of students with special needs, but kind of looking at them as the whole child and really working with the student developmentally rather than behaviorally. So that's been a recent shift in special education. It's different in every school. Some programs use behavioral modification. Some programs use developmental models. Some utilize both in conjunction, which is a lot of what we do at Shrub Oak. So it's a little bit different for every special education program, but I definitely think there's a lot more room to grow within special education, especially in the United States. We have a lot of work to do that hasn't necessarily been done before, and luckily it's starting to happen now, which is pretty exciting.
Wow, that's a great answer, and it really gives some insight as far as the challenges you're facing. So are there any other challenges from a day in, day out perspective that you kind of face as the director of education that you could share with our students? There's a lot of difficulties in any job. Is there anything that you might point out that a student might not think of if they would like to do what you do?
I think time management is always really hard. Making sure that you make the time for every single thing that needs to get done. I think a teacher's role, oftentimes a lot of people think, it's that 8 to 4 and then the day is over, and that's not necessarily the case. As a teacher, it really never ends. And you never really stop thinking about your students, even when you are home. So that's definitely one of the things that is a little different. And then as far as kind of this director role, really making sure that you're working with teachers to sort of individualize the instruction for each student. That's particularly hard because you run out of time, and we make sure at Shrub Oak that we have meetings at the end of the day to kind of spend time every single day talking about students and making sure we're meeting as a team talking about them, but that's not necessarily something that happens in every single school setting. So making sure that you kind of allot that time to be able to make sure you're providing the best program possible.
That's a great point. Awesome. As a reminder, you can check out all previous episodes at learnfromothers.org. And if you are an educator or a student, you can search for podcasts by career cluster. So, Caitlyn, we learned what you wanted to be when you grew up, which was a teacher, and what you actually do today, which is a director of education. So it's a pretty straight line path there. So looking back on your career, what would you do differently?
I would not take things so seriously. I think I've learned sort of over my time as a teacher, especially in special education, that a sense of humor is extremely important, and that sometimes you set out to do a lesson that you think is going to go one way and it goes a completely different way, and sometimes it goes a better way. So definitely, I think if I sort of looked at myself as a starting teacher, I would definitely tell myself to laugh a little bit more and not take everything so seriously, have a sense of humor, and just know that the way that the lesson is supposed to go, it will go, and that it's okay if things kind of steer away from the lesson plan.
That's got to be a pretty difficult lesson to learn, I would imagine, right? Like you put all this effort in and you want it to be just right. You want the students to have the exact takeaway that you want them to have, and to see it and to learn it the way you want it to, and then it sounds like it just doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, it's definitely a neat experience, but it's very humbling in learning, and it's not just a career lesson; it's a life lesson. Oftentimes,
right.
Especially now, I don't think anyone saw what's happening now to happen. So it's definitely a life lesson as well, not just a career lesson.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So we are taping this during COVID-19, right? Actually, I don't know, hopefully towards the tail end of it, but this is, we will see. So
Yeah.
hopefully when you hear this, we are well past COVID-19.
Yes, I hope so.
Oh my goodness. So, but if you would, speak to how your life has changed and the adjustments you've had to make and your teachers have had to make in the crazy world we live in. Do you feel like everything's doing the best they can? I mean, what's your perspective on how things are going from an educational perspective?
I definitely think, I think we're doing the best we can. I think obviously it's extremely hard, especially for the population of students that we work with, to do everything virtually, and we've completely shifted to this virtual learning, but it's definitely provided a neat opportunity for teachers and students to show a side of creativity that they haven't shown before. And I do think that we've been learning a lot based on this remote learning program that we'll be able to sort of take into the classroom when we're able to all be back together again. So although there is a lot of negative and challenging moments in virtual learning, I do think there has been a great deal of positive ones as well.
Yeah, so what aspect, you kind of touched on it there, what aspect of the COVID-19 learnings do you think might stick once you get back to more of a traditional format?
Well, I definitely think utilizing technology a little bit more than we did previously has been super helpful for a lot of our students, especially using kind of this like data-driven technology that really helps us see where a student started and where a student is now. Has been really beneficial, so I hope that sticks. And I definitely think utilizing creative ways to have a student reach teaching has been really beneficial for our students, and I think that will stick as well.
Wow. Okay. No, that's great points there. All right, now let's talk to the student who wants to do what you do, so you can either make that the director of education or a special ed teacher. What advice would you give them? Is there a typical career path?
Yeah, so it's pretty consistent, and I've kind of followed it. That career path. So typically, you go to four-year college, earn a bachelor's degree, and depending on the state that you are in, being a teacher is a little bit different because every state has different guidelines. I'm in New York, where it's actually pretty challenging to be a teacher. There's a lot of different tests and assessments that you have to complete in order to get a teaching certificate. And then now, actually, in New York State, and again, this is different in other states, but in New York State, you're required to get a master's within 5 years of receiving your bachelor's degree. So it's kind of straight from bachelor's to master's, and then typically, depending on the time that someone's looking to be a teacher, I came into teaching during a time where teaching jobs were not readily available. So I did work as a teaching assistant for a year before I was able to land a teaching position. But again, that's different for everybody. So typically people spend some time teaching for a couple of years, and then we'll sometimes go into a coordinating position, whether they're coordinating an IEP for special ed or coordinating a different learning program. So maybe a department of English or a department of social studies. Again, that's different for every school. And then go on and get your doctorate and really look at educational leadership. So there's a lot of different paths, and I know a lot of teachers who go into tutoring on the side or consulting on the side. So there's definitely a lot of different avenues to go down.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So what was that point? You mentioned you didn't necessarily want to pursue the director of education, but something changed. So what made you say, all right, I'm ready for that next step or that next challenge in your career?
I found myself sort of naturally mentoring teachers. I'm really student-focused and student-centered, and adore the relationships I have with students, and became very passionate about helping other teachers sort of form those relationships with students. So I was doing it kind of naturally as a teacher, and then I really became passionate about it and realized this is something I really want to do. So a few years ago, I started looking into doctorate programs in educational leadership and applied and got into one and started a doctorate program, and now I'm sort of at the tail end of that program. But it was really as I was teaching, I really became passionate about not only working with students but working with teachers, and realized that it was kind of a shift I wanted to make.
Right. Wow. Well, that's really cool to see your career progress kind of organically as you learned more about yourself and what you wanted to do or to be when you grew up, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
Wow, that's great. All right. Well, are there any current projects you're working on that you would like to share?
Yeah, so I am, like I said, I'm at the tail end of my doctorate program. So I am currently starting my dissertation on neurodiversity and special education teachers' perceptions of neurodiversity. So it's something that I will be working on over the course of the next 18 months. So it'll definitely still be happening when this is aired. So that's the major project I'm working on. And then obviously always working on smaller projects at Shrub Oak, kind of ensuring that we're providing the best education possible for our students.
Right. Wow. Well, that's really great. Well, how can our students learn more about you and your school?
So they can go to shruboak.org. We have a great website that has a lot of information about our programs and then also working with students on the autism spectrum. Also have a pretty great social media presence on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and then they could also find me on LinkedIn, Caitlyn Sweetapple. So those are different ways to find more information about Shrub Oak and myself.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your career journey today with us.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
Thank you for listening to Learn from Others, where we help others succeed by sharing success. Where will our next adventure take us? Subscribe to find out. If you know of someone who has a cool career story or occupation, contact Greg through Instagram at Greg Stanley LFO. That's GregStanley LFO. And we will see you soon as we learn from others together.